Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch. It's good to be back after a brief hiatus, a summer break, if you will. This is where we follow all the news and rumors on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. But this week, we have an entirely new next-gen platform to discuss. It's very exciting. I'm Damon Hadfield, and joining me, as always, are Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked.
What I did on my summer vacation.
Can't wait to hear about it. And Jonathan Dornbush, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond.
I know what you did last summer.
Oh my gosh. Wow, they just keep coming. I love it. And also joining us this week, special guest Bo Moore, IGN's executive editor of tech. Bo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Damon. I still know what you did last summer.
Perfect. I love to see it. We begin this week with some really exciting news. A new next-gen platform, a true next-gen handheld announced this week. You probably saw the news. Valve has revealed the Steam Deck. It is a handheld gaming PC arriving later this year. Runs a modified version of Valve's Steam OS, complete with a new console-like interface for easy navigation of both the Steam store and your library, but you aren't locked into just using Steam on the unit. And very, very cool. Both Ryan and Bo were able to travel to Valve's offices to actually try it out. Is that correct?
Yes,
that's
first
right.
of all, thank you, science, for vaccines that allowed us to get back out there and go actually see and play this thing.
So I want to hear some hands-on impressions. Bo, actually, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, the Steam Deck, I was pretty blown away by. It's, when you look at it, it looks like a Switch, and it's gonna draw those immediate comparisons. But under the hood, it's a full-blown gaming PC, which is really, really impressive to me. It means you can bring your full Steam library and non-Steam games too, and just carry everything over, keep playing. You don't need to buy additional copies. And on top of that, you can really just do all the cool things that PC gaming lets you do in terms of customization, customize your controls, mods, your settings, everything that PC gamers love. It's just that, but in a handheld form factor.
And Ryan, how about you? What were your first thoughts of the Steam Deck?
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I first saw the image of it, because I saw a picture of it before I actually got to use it, I was a little concerned about the stick placement and like what's going on with those track pads that are underneath each of the thumbsticks. But ergonomically, it really works for me. And the track pads, don't sleep on those. So what they actually do, you can use them as mouse cursors effectively. So. I requested Doom Eternal because I thought that's like an acid test for a modern first-person shooter. How's it going to run Doom Eternal? Answer: it was all on high settings with, I don't remember if you remember which. One setting was set to ultra, but most of it was high. And then, so it ran great, looked great. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm not just going to use the thumbsticks here. I'm going to try and replicate a mouse and keyboard experience. So I was using the left thumbstick for basically the WASD keys, and then the right trackpad for aiming, which when you combine with there's a gyroscope in it which activates when it senses your fingers touching the thumbsticks. Or I think it's either thumbstick. I'll have to have you jump in a second here to correct me, but in short, you can use a mix of the trackpad, the touchpad, I should say, and the gyroscopic motion to really kind of whip around pretty quick. And like I was aiming and playing pretty well in the very fast action Doom Eternal.
Yeah, it works with both of the trackpads and the thumbsticks. They're capacitive, so they can tell when you're touching any of those. And so you can customize this however you want, but the kind of default version that they were showing us was when your thumb is touching that trackpad, then the gyro sensor is enabled, meaning if you rotate I believe it was tilt would go left and right, moving for up and down and left and right. And basically it kind of simulates that, when you're a kid and you're trying to move left and you turn your controller and you move it over, it's like, oh, I just need to go that little bit further. This actually does that. And it kind of taps into this part of your brain that's like, oh, I just need a little bit of fine-tuned movement. So basically your thumb on the trackpad is doing the movement that your arm would make with a mouse, whereas the gyro controls is kind of that fine-tune with your wrist to really just fix those little bits of aiming. And yeah, like Ryan was saying, it is weirdly accurate. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you do, it's not far off from a traditional mouse and keyboard controls.
But you could also just Bluetooth connect an Xbox gamepad if you really wanted to, and just stand the Steam Deck up and play off of this. So, which, depending on the game, maybe you want to do. I don't know if you don't like the ergonomics of the Steam Deck for some reason, but it's wild. It's
you could just Bluetooth in a mouse and keyboard if you wanted. I was actually joking that I could see myself holding it in one hand, holding it in my left hand for the thumbstick, and then actually just connecting a Bluetooth mouse in my right hand to just for like a real-time strategy game where you really do want that like mouse control. That's an option for you.
And Bo, what are we looking at in terms of power inside the Steam Deck?
Yeah, so it's a custom AMD APU. So that's the same sort of thing that you'll find in the next gen consoles. It's using, and it's a 4-core, 8-thread CPU combined with an RDNA 2 GPU that has 8 compute units. And so they estimated that the total compute power is around 2 teraflops, which is roughly on par with the PS4 and the Xbox One. Actually a little bit more powerful than both of those. I think the PS4 was 1.9. So either way, it's in that ballpark. And but the important factor here is that the Steam Deck is targeting a 720p resolution on the handheld, which that's the same thing that you'll find on the Switch, but it is way more powerful than the Switch. So that's why, even though it's, power wise, you might ballpark it compared to the last gen consoles, because you're going for that lower resolution, it's able to hit these high settings and high frame rates for current gen games.
Which you can also dial those settings up or down, just like you could on any PC game. So if you're playing Doom Eternal and you want just like more frame rate, just give me more frame rate, you could dial the graphics settings down and get the frame rate up as high as that screen's going to allow, or vice versa. You could say, well, you know what, I'm playing Portal. I don't really need frame rate. I want this to look as good as I can. And you can dial up the graphics settings at the expense of the frame rate. So it's just kind of like, we went into it, I think, we have this default programming in our heads that when we see a device like this, you think like a walled garden, like a closed ecosystem. But this is a PC that just happens to be in a handheld, and it has there's just none of the gatekeeping that comes with the console. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just, this is just different. There's just none of that.
Well, it's funny. There's been so much talk for months about this fabled Switch Pro, and then it turns out what Nintendo announced last week was the Switch OLED model, not the Switch Pro yet, at least. It kind of seems like Valve has gone and made their own, much more powerful handheld, although it doesn't switch, Bo, or does it? Are we able to plug it into our TV?
It does. Yeah, it is it's a PC. And so you can, sort of in the same way that you could take a gaming laptop and just plug it into a monitor and a mouse and keyboard, you can do the same thing here. It has a USB-C in output, that's the single port, but you could just take that port, plug in a USB-C dock, which Valve will be developing and releasing an official Steam Deck dock. They'll probably call it Steam Dock. I don't know. But you don't have to use that one specifically. You can use any USB-C dock that you can, dongle or whatever that you can get off the internet right now, to just, then plug in HDMI or whatever connections you want to then plug in your mouse and keyboard, peripherals, Ethernet cable, anything you need, and then just play it on a PC or not a PC, but on a traditional desktop setup, or plug it into a TV if you wanted to.
I'm very excited for the Steam Deck. I think I'm definitely going to be getting one later this year. Jonathan, I have some questions about what all this might mean for Sony and PlayStation. But first, what was your personal reaction to the reveal of the Steam Deck?
Sort of similar to you in the sense of it's funny that after all these months of rumors and hope that instead of a Switch Pro, Valve just went ahead and made one themselves. I think it's a great solution for a thing like this, and hearing all sort of the hands-on feedback really is what won me over from Bo, Ryan, and everyone, is just sort of like this thing works. Like and the way it works is really impressive. I don't really play games on PC that much, so I don't have any like immediate desire to go buy one to go play my indie games on a handheld that I'm not already playing on Switch. But in terms of who this is for and what it's able to accomplish, I think it's a really, really smart product, and I'm really interested to see how it changes the landscape.
Ryan, do you think this has a real benefit for Xbox since Xbox has aligned itself so closely with PC over the recent years, and all of its, I believe all of the future planned first-party games are day one on PC as well, which means that they're all day one handheld games. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the thought that struck me in the middle of the day when we were at Valve. I was like, wait a second, because we didn't know at first. They didn't tell us till later in the day that like, oh, by the way, yeah, it's a PC and you can run other game stores on it. You're not locked into Steam. Because again, we went in with that, or at least I went in with that sort of traditional console walled garden mentality, and it's like, no, you can run the Epic Game Store on it, or you could run if it'll be compatible, and I'll throw a bow to this to speak to in a second. If you can get it to run Microsoft Store, the Xbox Store, because it is a Linux-based device. SteamOS is Linux-based, but at worst, you've got a lot of these Xbox first-party games that are on Steam now and coming to Steam. For instance, Halo Infinite's coming to Steam on day one, so you can play on day one. You now have Halo Infinite portable via the Steam Deck. So this thing is basically the Xbox handheld, the X-Boy, as it was referred to colloquially for years, that Microsoft never built, that Valve has now built for them. Not literally for them, but Valve has built it. So that commitment to PC gaming that Microsoft, remember for years, it was Microsoft said, oh, we're serious about PC gaming. And everybody laughed at them because they really weren't. They just never really committed to it. But over these last few years, they absolutely have. And now it's paying off for them in the form of a little assist from Valve, creating what is effectively a handheld Xbox as well, because of Microsoft's and Xbox Game Studios' commitment to PC gaming. It's pretty crazy.
I think a lot of people are going to be wondering about Game Pass. Bo, Game Pass on the Steam Deck comes with a little caveat. Is that correct?
Yeah. So as of right now, the Steam Deck, like Ryan said, it uses SteamOS, which is built on Proton, which is a form of Linux that I believe Valve actually developed themselves. But so Proton will let you play Windows games and Linux games. It's basically a way to get a bunch of Windows games running fine on Linux. The caveat to that, though, is that Game Pass games and pretty much anything sold on the Microsoft Store, I don't think will work on Proton, at least not right now. That's the thing. So there is still potentially a workaround, because Valve told us that if you want, you could just wipe SteamOS entirely and install Windows on the Steam Deck. And there's probably a way that you could, dual boot it, because Linux loves letting you do things like that, where you can just have your default SteamOS, and then you want be like, let's swap over to a version of Windows, and then there, sure, no problem, you could get straight into Game Pass. But specifically within the SteamOS, I believe you are going to be limited, except for those games that, like Ryan said, are on Steam. So Halo Infinite, sure, you got it on Steam. You can play it on Steam Deck right there.
That's what we were calling it before we got there and found out the real name.
It's true. But yeah, as far as the games that are on Game Pass, you are going to be limited as far as we know. But that's the thing, is down the line, Microsoft could say like, hey, you've made this great device. We want our players to be able to play the games that they have on, this device that's out there that is a PC. They might, work with Valve to get Game Pass games working on Proton, and by extension SteamOS. And I can totally see that happening.
I'd be shocked if they didn't, because Microsoft has talked the talk and walked the walk recently of putting their games where players are, and sort of trying to get rid of those barriers. So I fully expect some sort of official solution from Microsoft sooner rather than later. But But I think you're right, Bo. I imagine the community on literally like day one of the Steam Deck's release will have figured out some sort of dual boot or other workaround solution so that you can actually play your Game Pass games right on this thing.
So, Jonathan, obviously Nintendo Switch, phenomenally successful. Now the Steam Deck, as Ryan was saying, kind of gives us a portable Xbox as well in certain respects. So should Sony be worried about all this? Is Sony now the only platform holder that doesn't have any sort of portable gaming option?
I mean, as much as I would love a Vita 2, I don't really see it, anywhere in the future in the cards. I mean, based on how Sony has been acting recently, I don't think they're going to be worried until they have to be. They're still selling out PS5s as much as they can. All of their games seem to be selling very well. So, I don't think PlayStation right now is in a rush to put its games on places at launch that aren't PlayStation. That doesn't mean down the line things might not change, or things might change, forgive me, because certainly I wouldn't have expected PlayStation games, even, a couple years down the line, to show up on Steam like Days Gone and Horizon Zero Dawn have, and more games to come. So they're definitely amenable to change, but I think it's going to take some time before we see any other major shifts from them in this department.
Well, the Steam Deck, we don't have an exact release date for it yet, but it's supposed to be coming later this year. Bo, I believe there are 3 SKUs. Do you have the details on those?
Yeah, so one of the important things to note is that there's three SKUs at 3 different price points, but they actually all have the same power inside. The GPU, CPU, it's the same no matter which model you get. The only difference between the three SKUs is the storage space. So at the base model is $399 for a 64 gig amount of storage. Mid tier is $529 for 256 gigs. And then the top end is $649 for 512 gigs. And those 2 top end models, they use, all 3 of them are an SSD. So, we've been talking a lot about SSDs on here and how that's how you get the much faster load times than old school hard drives. All 3 are an SSD, but the 256 and 512 drives are NVMe drives, which are even faster than just your regular SSDs. So you're going to get a little bit more speed there for your load times, but all 3 of them will be faster than, for example, the Switch.
Like I said, I'm very excited about the Steam Deck. It's cool to have an entirely new next-gen platform to discuss in the coming weeks and months on this very show. We're going to hop over to some PS5 exclusive news for our second topic. We're going to say goodbye to Bo. Bo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, an upcoming PS5 console exclusive has been delayed. It is GhostWire Tokyo. Of course, it's also coming to PC, but it is a timed PS5 exclusive. It was supposed to be out in October. I guess it has been a long time since we've heard anything about GhostWire Tokyo. So, Jonathan, was this news surprising to you?
No, it's that Phil Spencer muddying up the waters of PlayStation. No, this happens. Obviously, we as you said, haven't really seen much of this game in a long time. I think maybe earlier this year we got a little bit of a snippet of new footage, but it's been relatively quiet. And Tango is certainly a studio that I'm more than willing to let take as much time as they need to create something really memorable and spooky in their own right. So I'm glad they're taking the time that they need to. October would have been a great time for a spooky game, but whenever they choose to put it out, I'm looking forward to this one.
There are a couple other spooky games coming out in October. Of course, Back 4 Blood, not a PS5 exclusive, but that one's looking very cool. But Jonathan, does it worry you that now, so Horizon Forbidden West is supposedly still coming out this year, but we don't have a release date. That means that after Death Stranding Director's Cut on September 24th, we don't have a single release date for a PS5 exclusive after that. It's just a complete question mark for the final quarter of the year. Does that have you worried?
Not really. PlayStation is typically pretty quiet in the falls, at least for the PlayStation 4 generation. There were definitely some games as the generation went on that came out in the fall, like Marvel's Spider-Man, Death Stranding, and then certainly everything at the PS5 launch. But for many years at the beginning of the life cycle, they were more than content to let third parties handle the fall, and they would put things out in the first and second quarters. Horizon was in February. Days Gone was going to be a February game when it first came out and then got pushed a few months later. God of War obviously was an April release. They're more than happy to let their big games come out in the early part of a year rather than toward the end. And so it doesn't really surprise or worry me in any way, especially considering, the last year of exclusives. They put out 4 or 5 pretty amazing first party published exclusives for the PS5 and PS4. We got Returnal and Ratchet in this past year. Obviously we're going to get stuff like Forza Horizon and Halo on the Xbox side, but Xbox, needs to put out the exclusives, whereas PlayStation has a pretty good stable that if you haven't gotten to those games yet, you have a good bench to go into.
Sure. And Ryan, I guess this also means that GhostWire Tokyo has effectively been delayed on Xbox as well, right? Because we fully expect it to eventually come to Xbox.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word on the street is that it's a 1-year window of exclusivity, which would make perfect sense. And I imagine that on that 1 year to the day, barring any technical reason, that it will indeed hit Xbox and Game Pass at that time too. So yeah, I guess one less game for fall 2022 for Xbox. Although they've already got Starfield penciled in for 11/11 as their absolute big gun that everything else is going to line up around. But yeah, that's quite all right. It's, as Jonathan said, it's Tango, a lot of very talented people there, and The Evil Within was excellent. I love the idea and the sort of weird concept. I love that this Ghostwire Tokyo is a first-person mystery of some kind. So I can't wait to see more of it. Take their time. We have plenty of other games in the meantime, as Jonathan kind of touched on as well. So yeah, I'll be happy whenever it comes out. And yeah, I'm not going to wait a year. I definitely will play it on PS5 when it releases.
Sure. Personally, I'm just really eager to get release dates for both Horizon Forbidden West and Halo Infinite. Very much looking forward to those. Before we go this week, we have results from our last poll, which is now several weeks ago now, coming out of E3. We asked which next gen E3 or summer event reveal had you most excited, and the winner with nearly 35% of the vote was Elden Ring. Not too much of a surprise. People have been crazy excited about that game, even though there was very little information about it until right before E3 this year. So that one's coming out in January. Don't have to wait too much longer for that. Way down at the bottom of the results was Avatar with less than 5% of the vote. So hopefully for Ubisoft, excitement builds for that game a little bit more, and maybe in the run up to the 4 sequels that are still coming, apparently. Poll for you for next week. We want to know, which Steam Deck would you get? The 64 gig, 256, or 512 gig model, or are you not interested? Make sure to vote in our poll at IGN.com. We will share the results with you next episode. And that's going to do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Thank you to Ryan and Jonathan and Bo. We will be back same time next week. Fingers crossed. Friday, 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, with more Next Gen news. We'll see you then.